Congressman Adam Schiff, Democrat of California, thank you as well. A busy time for all. I want to broaden our lens with you and ask about all of this news, the Russia subpoenas, part of the original reason we were going to have you on. But that is something the White House is responding to. Then there are all these things the White House is jamming into the system, this pardon, the ousting of a very prominent and controversial aide, Sebastian Gorka, which we have more on later, and the announcement of the transgender policy. As a member of Congress, as someone who works with different presidents, your views on all of this coming in the midst of what is an emergency federal response to a hurricane?
Well, of course, it certainly looks like the dump of a lot of bad information on the end of the week in the midst of a hurricane to try to bury as much of it as possible. And I agree, I guess, with Bob Bauer's conclusion that this was an attempt to narrowcast to his base and hope the rest of the country wasn't watching what he was doing. But, of course, we are watching what he's doing. And what he did in terms of the pardon for Arpaio, I think, is reprehensible. This is someone who violated the law, was conducting his policing in an overtly discriminatory fashion. And the fact that he would essentially promise this pardon at a political rally, that it was a purely political instrument for the president, is, I think, an abuse of the pardon power. And it caps...
Can I ask
yes.
you to expound on that? You're saying, based on what you've seen, you think it is an abuse because he used it essentially as a kind of political campaign ploy?
Absolutely. This is a political tool. He telegraphed it at a rally in front of his supporters. This isn't about the interest of justice. This isn't about rewarding someone or giving them a second chance or acknowledging their other service to the country. This is patently political. And to the degree there's any overlap with the Russia investigation, I guess I have a different take than Mr. Bauer. The concern I have is that he's sending a message to people that may be under investigation by Bob Mueller that I have your back and I've got a pardon waiting for you. So I am concerned about that because obviously this is a president who is not above using the pardon power strictly in his own very narrow personal interest.
Well, you're raising something incredibly disturbing, and it goes back, as you mentioned, to what Bob Bauer had already written about, analyzed prior to this use of the power. You're saying the very recklessness, the very flouting of the law, the fact that this all was done by President Trump tonight during this hurricane as people deal with that, and doing it before even the criminal justice process played out with Arpaio. He was facing perhaps up to 6 months but hadn't been sentenced yet. You're saying that very flouting could be deliberate to send this message to others who are going to be dealing potentially with Bob Mueller's criminal inquiry?
You know, certainly the president is more than capable of that. It could be, you know, just about delivering this to the base, some more red meat for the base. You know, what disturbs me about this at so many levels is this caps a week and a half of quite deliberately divisive conduct by the President of the United States. A president is supposed to be a unifying figure that tries to bring the country together to make us a more perfect union. But instead, this president is determined to divide us in every way, divide us by his transgender policy, divide us with the pardon of Arpaio, divide us by suggesting that white supremacists and neo-Nazis are the equivalent of those who would protest them. At every step of the way, he is affirmatively, it seems, going out of his way to appeal to the prejudices of the American people and try to divide us. That is not the kind of qualities we look for in a commander-in-chief, and I think it really is tearing at the fabric of the country.
Your colleague, Senator Schumer, the leader of the Democrats in the Senate, has a new statement out decrying this as supporting a man in Arpaio who was found, again, by an independent process to be discriminating against Latinos based on their race and ethnicity. His concern being this sends a message of comfort or encouragement to other law enforcement to do that, even if they're found in violation by a judge. Do you worry about that message? And if so, as a member of Congress, what will others do about it?
Well, I do worry about that message that the president is sending. And look, I've worked with law enforcement my entire career, beginning as a young prosecutor in Los Angeles, and I have tremendous respect for law enforcement. And most are not going to accept what the president is doing as any encouragement to violate the law. They're dedicated to upholding the law. But nonetheless, he is telling the whole country that the rule of law means very little to him, that he'll cross his own Justice Department even during the pendency of proceedings when it's in his naked political interest. And he's perfectly okay for even law enforcement officers, officers of the court, to ignore the law when it comes to immigration, or in the case of people who were loud and outspoken in favor of his campaign. What an awful message to send the country. And you really appreciate at times like this what it meant when we had a president in the last administration who was trying all the time to bring us together, to have a president who is, trying to divide us and do so in such a blatant fashion.
Congressman, before I let you go, can I ask you also about the news on Russia tonight?
Of course.
The other big stories here are NBC News confirming the first grand jury subpoenas going out from Bob Mueller to associates of Paul Manafort regarding international activities and lobbying campaigns, including touching on Ukraine, and the Wall Street Journal reporting that Mueller is explicitly looking at intelligence showing Russian hackers not only wanted to get material about Hillary Clinton to the Trump campaign, which is somewhat known and bad enough, but that the very person, according to the Wall Street Journal, they were trying to get it to is Mike Flynn, who, of course, was not only removed from the Trump administration, but who has publicly said he wants criminal immunity and he has a, quote, story to tell. Sometimes Rachel and others will ask you to connect the dots. I feel like the dots are already fairly lined up. But what can you tell us as your reaction to both of those reports tonight?
Well, I'll try my best to connect some of the dots. You have the dossier, which makes a variety of allegations. Most people have fixated on the salacious ones. But the more concerning allegations to me in the dossier were allegations that, people, sources at the Kremlin were telling Mr. Steele that the Russians had three objectives. They wanted to see who was receptive, who might have a favorable view of Russia that might be receptive to Russian help. And they wanted to gather intelligence, and they wanted to publish compromising information in the service of the other two objectives. And here you now have emails that have been disclosed publicly about this meeting with Don Jr. that very much fits that description. You have Porter Smith giving a interview to the Wall Street Journal and talking about how he is in contact with Russian hackers, among others, that may have compromising information on Hillary Clinton, and he can be a conduit to the campaign through people like Mike Flynn. All of this, they look like pieces of a puzzle that we need to try to flesh out and see whether they're connected or whether this is just some awful coincidence. And you have Bob Mueller doing his job as he should, in a very methodical way that is looking at whether individuals may have violated the law. There's a certain sequencing to an investigation where you may look at certain people and you may, if the facts warrant, bring charges against certain people, and that builds a case against others down the road. So these pieces do fit together. It's still too early to conclude where they lead, but there's certainly, it certainly warrants a thorough and nonpartisan investigation by Congress,
right.
And it warrants allowing Bob Mueller to do his job without any interference.
Congressman